I'm going to show you the one thing I have in my pack that my grandfather made sure I always carried in my pack in case I got lost or separated from him and I needed to get a fire started. Of all the survival information and videos I've seen, I haven't seen anybody use what he taught me to use to get a fire started in just about any kind of condition. A lot of these survivalists, they use their flint and their fire steel, things that make little sparks that they catch onto pieces of carbonized cloth to get some dryer lint to burn, to then ignite some small pieces of wood they chopped out of the middle of some branches to find some dry wood. Those are great skills to have, and those are good items to have and to know how to use them when you need them. But in the real world, when everything is soaked, you're almost frozen to death, your fingers are so frozen you can barely move them. I want the odds of whether I continue to live or not to be stacked more in my favor than having to depend on a glowing ember on a piece of dryer lint. Especially when my fingers are so frozen from being out in the cold, I'm probably going to drop it in the snow anyway. With a lot of this survivalist stuff, a lot of these things are practical to do in the environment where someone is making a YouTube video, but how's it going to work in the real world? It reminds me of what Mike Tyson said. People think they have a plan until I punch them in the face. Sometimes winter in nature can punch pretty hard, even when you think you have a plan. Actually, how would Mike Tyson say that? People think I have a plan until I punch them in the face. Okay, I'll work on it. All right, let's get down to business. What my grandpa always made sure I was carrying is one of these. Call it a road flare, call it an emergency flare, call it a fusee. Call it $3, no, $2.99 that could save your life. This thing's going to burn for 15 minutes with a very hot, intense flame. If a kid gets lost in the woods and they're going to freeze to death if they don't get a fire started, what would you rather they have? Fire steel and a piece of lint, or one of these? Just try not to breathe the smoke. Although you shouldn't be breathing any smoke. This will burn long enough to dry out these small pieces of wood until they catch on fire and support the fire themselves. Got to get a good balance between having enough fuel to get the fire going and enough airflow. Might have to adjust it a few times to make sure that flame is blasting right on the wood you want to dry out. These 15-minute ones are small, they're lightweight, easy to pack. You could put several of them in your pack. You can get them in 30-minute ones, but I think they're too long. I would rather have two 15-minute flares than one 30-minute flare. But 15 minutes usually enough to get enough coals going inside that the wood will take it from there. This wasn't even an ideal pile. Ideally, we could have looked around more, found some better wood, positioned the wood better. I just wanted to show you can stick it in a little pile of wet wood like that and get it to burn. Get enough fuel on there without smothering it. Got to keep the airflow going. The flare burned out, but we have enough fire in there to get going. In a real survival situation, I would have been more deliberate on how I picked out my wood and how I put all this together. But in a real survival situation, do you know you're going to have the presence of mind to be able to craft a fire in an ideal way? You may have gone through some trauma. Maybe that trauma is what put you in that situation. A wreck, who knows what. You might be going through hypothermia, your fingers might not be working because they're frozen. You might be in a panic. In a survival situation, things are going to be much different than they're going to be when you're practicing or when you're making a YouTube video on how to do this. In that kind of a situation, I think this could give you a great advantage over matches, over something that makes sparks, or a lighter. Not to say that this is the best or they won't come up with new technology that'll be better than this. I think they may have already come up with some things. I've seen some advertisements for some electronic gadgets that seem pretty potent. It can be a bit of a process building up to a real good fire. Putting just enough wood on so the fire can dry it out, but without putting on so much you smother it. But at least at this point there's enough heat I could get my hands warmed up enough to start working again if they were frozen. I can feel the heat radiating. In a survival situation, I'd be looking for more material like this that was up off the ground, that's dry, that has this lichen on it. Could have got a fire going faster that way. Wanted to show you a little more of a worst case scenario though. Worst case scenario would be putting that snow on it. We don't want that worse of a worst scenario. Now that we have a bit of a fire going, we can relax some, knowing we might actually live. I can tell you how this all started for me. When I was a young kid, my grandpa used to talk about going steelhead fishing down at Rainy Falls on the wild and scenic part of the Rogue River. It was a bit of a hike down there, and it was winter steelhead, so of course it was in the winter when things are all wintry. He knew I liked fishing with him. He told me when I turned 12, he'll start taking me down there with him. After I turned 12 that next winter, he called me one night, asked me, "Do you want to go fishing tomorrow?" Of course I want to go fishing tomorrow. So from then on, he started taking me down there with him. It was about a 1.25 mile hike down to where we started fishing. Then we'd fish our way down another 1.25 miles. On the short days of winter, it would be dark by the time we started hiking out of there. We'd end up hiking out with flashlights. If we were really lucky, sometimes we'd hike out of there with moonlight. Hiking out of that river canyon lit up with moonlight, that was a beautiful experience. The night before, I'd go over to their house, spend the night, we'd get all of our stuff packed together. And one of the things he would show me is he would make sure he had one of these in his pack. And he encouraged me to start putting one in my pack too. This was the backpack he used all that time when we were fishing. When we were going through his stuff, I think they were just going to throw this away, but I didn't have the heart to let this go. I spent so much time, I walked so many miles looking at the back of this backpack following Grandpa. I broke the strap off it. I don't know how difficult that would be to fix. It's partly wore out. For most people, this thing's probably worthless, but for me, there's a lot of memories here. He was so passionate about the idea of carrying a fusee or a flare, specifically in winter conditions. He would take any opportunity he could to remind me of how important that is. I think it was years later, I was much older, there was this news in the story. I was going to say there was this news in the story, but I meant to say there was this story in the news. This kid got lost out in the snow. I think the family went out to get Christmas trees or something like that, made a day of it up out in the snow. And suddenly the little kid just disappeared. They had the search crews out there for, I can't remember if it was days or weeks. They searched and searched and I don't think they ever did. I don't know if they ever found remains or not. But while that story was going, it really got to my grandpa. And this fire is getting to my right here. It's getting really hot. He was really distraught over this little kid, and he would talk about how if only his parents would have equipped him with a flare and the ability to start a fire or something, if not just to keep warm, but to make smoke to signal where he's at. He was so concerned for this kid and so distraught over this story, and I know what he was doing. He was imagining, what if that was one of us kids? What if he took one of us out somewhere like that and we got separated from him, we got lost, and we didn't have the tools to get a fire started or somehow survive out there? I know he was imagining how helpless and, well, I don't know exactly what he was imagining, but he definitely used that as an opportunity to remind us, always carry one of these in your pack. It could save your life. And again, I'm not trying to take away from those who are teaching how to build a fire with sparks and dryer lint and all those techniques. Those are things you should learn how to do. I might even do some videos about that myself. Having a flare is just one of the tools to have in your toolbox. You don't want to be just a one-trick pony and the only way you know how to start a fire in the wild is with one of those. Learn how to find the dry wood, learn how to find pitch and pieces of resin on the trees to help start a fire. Life comes at you fast sometimes. Be prepared for anything. I think I might be ripping off a commercial with that. Well, this little fire wouldn't be enough to keep us going through the night to survive. We'd of course want to go around, gather enough firewood to keep us warm through the night, build a shelter, but that's not what this video is about. We'll save that one for another one. If you ever take your kids out in winter conditions, think of my grandpa. What would he do? He's not around anymore to continue spreading his message. Maybe I can help him out here.